But I'd like to start off today with doing a bit of a response video. I want to do a bit of a response to a Prager U video. Prager U University is a YouTube channel that puts out a lot of right-wing, pro-capitalist, pro-religion videos. And this one is actually a couple of years old, this one, but recently Prager U on Twitter has been tweeting out all of their old videos in order to get people to watch them again. So this was one that got tweeted out over the last couple days, and I figure that if they're going to try and inspire new people in order to watch it, then perhaps we should do a response video to it. I don't believe this is one that a lot of people have done before. So the video is called, "Does Science Argue For or Against God?" And it's just quite simply about that. So I figure that if he's going to be bringing up all these old videos, then we're going to be discussing them. I think the video that Prager U's put out that has been responded to the most by the atheist community was his one where I believe the title was called "Without God There Is No Murder," and he pretty much argues that murder was established by God, and therefore and the fact that God dictates that murder is wrong. If you don't believe in God, then murder is just an opinion, which big problems with that one, but that one's been done to death, so I didn't want to bother with that one. And I do believe that was one that got tweeted out again recently. But yeah, this one is, in my opinion, overlooks many different factors and is just an oversimplification, so we're going to get into it. And better yet, I'm very excited, I get to bring back a segment that I haven't had a chance to use in a long time. So I'm very happy to bring back the hitch slap. It's been, I think, months since I've had the chance to use it again. And for those who haven't seen my other segments with hitch slap, which I think I only did one, possibly, I rolled it out and then I didn't have a chance to use it again. But the point of the hitch slap, this segment of the show, of the podcast, is to, just like Hitchens did in life, the point is to use rational arguments to take down religious points. But I don't want to prattle on too long, so without wasting any more time, let's get right into it.
In 1966, Time magazine ran a cover story asking, "Is God dead?" The cover reflected the fact that many people had accepted the cultural narrative that God is obsolete.
First off, the whole God is dead thing was actually first put forth by Nietzsche. And in this book, he was theorizing about how humanity would act without God. Nietzsche was an atheist, but he seemed to believe that the church and the Christian faith seemed to, first off, he believed that it civilized Europeans from being the warmongering race that they were. And on top of that, he theorizes that with the rise of secularism and the decline of Christianity and religion, he theorized that it was going to give rise to a moral relativity, which he turned out to be right on. But this is really what he's making reference to with God is Dead on Time magazine. That's more just a little insight rather than a response.
As science progresses, there's less need for a God to explain the universe.
But getting into the response, God obsolete? In some regards, yes. In the scientific empirical community, it's not good to look and take the Bible and religion under serious eyes, because this can really blind you to what the truth is in the world, how things are. Because that's the point of science. The science, it tells us, what things are made up with. What is there? What are they? So this is the point of science. So if we're moving to a more objective empirical world, like how we're looking at the world as it is, then God is getting obsolete. And God kind of is obsolete, in my opinion, in the empirical world. Trying to say that God created the earth, that we are, a member, we are descendant of Adam and Eve. Trying to say this with all seriousness, with trying to push it in the scientific community, is a bad idea because it doesn't stand up to the actual empirical evidence. So in many ways, God is obsolete. However, if we're talking about in the personal life, then I'm sure the argument gets a little more entangled there, and then that's where things get complicated. But if we're talking about in the scientific, empirical world, then yes, the idea of God as he is obsolete.
It turns out, though, that the rumors of God's death were premature. In fact, perhaps the best arguments for his existence come from, of all places, science itself.
I think you're looking in the wrong place for God, bud. Even many Christians themselves, some rational Christians, some rational Christian scientists, they'll admit that you can't go looking into science in order to find proof for God. In fact, if you go looking into science itself, then you're actually putting yourself in a tough place, because that's where you're going to get torn down. In fact, all the progress in destroying the narrative that God created the world and the universe has been done through scientific purposes. So you're really looking in the wrong area for this, especially considering how many in the scientific community, because of what they look into and how they are charged with figuring out how the universe is and how the world is, when they look into it and compare it to the myths that come from the Bible, they can see that there is a big problem there when they say that God created the universe, and then they see scientific evidence of different possibilities and the way that the world works. Then you're really, once again, looking in the wrong area. Many of these scientists spend their time pulling down the idea of God because it doesn't line up with the science. And for many of us, if you want, science is, it's an objective empirical evidence tool, if you know what I mean. Sort of like how Christians say that God means an objective morality. It's sort of the same thing with science. The science can't be circumvented. As long as the science is accurate and done properly, the science can't be circumvented. But I'll give you an opportunity. Let's see what you have to say about science proving God.
Here's the story. The same year Time featured its now famous headline, the astronomer Carl Sagan announced that there were two necessary criteria for a planet to support life: the right kind of star and a planet the right distance from that star. Given the roughly octillion planets in the universe, that's one followed by 24 zeros, there should have been about septillion planets, that's one followed by 21 zeros, capable of supporting life.
First off, I'm not a guy to go against Carl Sagan, and he was absolutely right when he gave those two criteria. The problem is there's actually more that is required for a habitable planet than just the type of star and the distance from the star. As we can take a look here, what makes a habitable planet? Well, it depends on the temperature, and this does depend on the star and the distance from the star for sure. We have water. Almost all life form, as we know it anyway, need water. This could be a different story depending the farther in the universe that we go, because we don't know what weird stuff is out there or how many different life forms are out there. Unless we actually get boots on the ground, so to speak, such as rovers like we're doing on Mars, we can't be sure of what sort of life lives there and what sort of sustenance that life needs to survive. But right now, as the criteria, water is definitely unnecessary. On most planets, though, you'll find a big body of water if they're within the range that they're talking about. If it's an equal distance from the sun and it's the star is appropriate, then you'll find a big body of water, usually. Atmosphere. Absolutely, if you have a heavy ozone layer that tends to trap a lot of greenhouse gases in, well, then you're going to have a pretty hot surface. So this all depends as well. The energy, such as the chemical energy necessary to run their form of life. So humans, just like every other animal species, are reliant in some regard on the sun, but not nearly to the degree that our plant life is. Our plant life needs sun to survive. With no sun, our plant life will die. So it all depends on the type of life form, without a doubt. And then nutrients. What is there in order for us to take in order to survive? So there are actually more factors than Carl Sagan brought up. Now, once again, just saying that Carl Sagan said that doesn't prove or disprove anything. So let's move on a little farther in order to figure out what they're talking about.
With such spectacular odds, scientists were optimistic that the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, known by its initials SETI, an ambitious project launched in the 1960s, was sure to turn up something soon. With a vast radio telescopic network, scientists listened for signals that resembled coded intelligence. But as the years passed, the silence from the universe was deafening. As of 2014, researchers have discovered precisely bupkis, nada, zilch, which is to say zero, followed by an infinite number of zeros.
So a few things on this. First off, considering that it's Prager U and he's a Jewish man who pushes religion and says how important religion is, I find this a little interesting that he decides to take what I would consider a secular scientific argument, which has to do with there's other life forms, and is trying, essentially he's trying to turn it on itself, which I think is a little funny considering how I find this a little funny because the religious narrative tends to say that humans are God's children and therefore the most important life form in the universe, and they never actually say that there's no life form on another planet, but this is for a long time been the Bible passage and narrative that's been used in order to push that how important humans are, how valid humans are in the universe. So the fact that he's trying to then take that and use it, the fact we haven't found any sort of life forms quite like that to justify his point of view about God, I find that a little bit funny. And the other thing is, when they're talking about how scientists, they put their radio wave signals and aim them towards the sky, this is a very, very inefficient way of trying to make first contact for a few different reasons. Radio waves aren't necessarily strictly have to be man-made, and here's a good example is we've all heard of the WOW signal, which was back about 40 years ago. Scientists got a signal that came from space and it was a radio wave and they couldn't figure out what it was. So what ended up happening is the scientist who copied down the radio wave, he ended up circling it and he wrote WOW next to it, like on the paper when he copied everything down. So this is why it became known as the WOW signal. Well, recently they believe that they discovered that this came from two comets that happened to be passing in that area. They discovered these two comets, traced their trails back to what had been in this area where this radio signal came from at the time, and are pretty sure it came from them. Also, just pointing at the sky and firing away radio waves is, again, very inefficient because the farther away they go from space, well, again, just the farther something is away, even if it looks close together, as soon as you get closer to it, it's much farther apart. If you're trying to do this to planets that are light years away, very inefficient. Not to mention that a radio wave in a vacuum can only travel the speed of light, which means that it's going to, and considering how our closest celestial cousin, our closest solar system to Earth, is 4.5 light years away from us, that means before they could even get it, it would be 4.5 years. I believe it's 4.5, yeah, or 4 light years away. Then they would have to send that signal back to us at 4.5 light years. It would take another 4.5 light years in order to get home. They would also have to figure out that the signal came from us. If they even get it, they would have to have somebody there ready to listen, because that's also the other problem with the radio wave. Is once it comes in, unless it's being broadcast continuously, once it comes in, you'll hear it and then it's gone. So unless somebody has their microphone or their telescope pointed in the right direction to receive that signal, you're not going to be heard. In fact, the other thing is, this doesn't prove intelligent life. What actually would be a much more, a better idea for proving that you are an intelligent life form would be to send a signal that would, with mathematical equations, mathematical solutions, send them blaring music, because this would signify that it is an intelligent life form that is reaching out to you. This would not just come naturally, this could not just come as a radio wave from a comic, but if you are sending math solutions that are solved, that would prove that there is intelligence out there. And just to take it a little bit farther too, because I figure that if you were to break down this part of the argument, the other part of the argument would be that they would go to say that, well, we also haven't had any intelligent life that has visited us. Well, there's a few problems about aliens coming here too. For one good one would be aliens, if they were actually to make a traveling to Earth to try and make contact, they would have to solve the problem of distance, the problem of fuel, the problem of food. Depending how long it is, they may have to determine the problem of age. And that's before they even get here, and they have to worry about, making contact in language that both species can understand. It also doesn't take into account about the spread of germs. Don't forget, back in the day when the conquistadors made contact with the natives of the New World, they their immune systems weren't used to the germs, and this is what caused the outbreak. It wasn't actually, like many people say, it was a germ warfare. It was an accidental contamination, and it turned into an outbreak. And this is very possible if we're having visitors from another planet. They could have a type of disease that we don't know about. Maybe they're immune to the disease, but we wouldn't, because our immune systems have never known it. So they would have to take that into consideration. There's plenty of things about why it would not be efficient to go to another planet. And believe me, I love my Star Trek too, but it's not realistic. Also, I believe it was Einstein who theorized that an object of mass cannot travel faster than the speed of light. I believe this was also when he was theorizing that the faster the speed of light you go, the slower time travels. But you can't actually travel faster than the speed of light as an object. You can't have an engine that pushes a object of mass faster than the speed of light. So even if they could almost get up to the speed of light, they would still have the problem of distance, because like I said, our closest relative, which is Alpha Centauri, is 4.5 light years away, which means even if they're traveling at almost the speed of light, it's still going to take them that time to get here. Now we take Einstein's theory into account, and we take human technology into account, how far we've progressed in space travel, and just travel in general, how fast we get places. We've made a lot of improvements for a species, but we have not made remotely close to intergalactic travel. While there is possible species have mastered this, again, it's not efficient, because unless Einstein's theory is false, and until it's proven false, we're taking it to be true, then nothing can travel that fast. And let's say that Alpha Centauri doesn't have the ability to support life, which I don't believe it would with the type of stars that they have, because they have multiple stars. I think they got 2, maybe 3 sun stars in their solar system. Well, then we're just going farther out, and they have to travel farther in order to get here. So it doesn't really work. The only possible theory, that as far as I can tell, that would possibly work for going to the speed of light or faster, would be the warp bubble theory. The warp bubble theory says that a ship is surrounded in a warp bubble, and what this does is the object itself doesn't actually move at the speed of light, but the bubble travels through space. It's sort of like space and time move around it. That would be the theory, except that is just that. It's just a theory, and it's also a flawed theory. There's a lot of gaps in that theory. Whether that's even a possibility, we're nowhere close to even determining that. So this is why making contact with another species, an alien species, or an alien species coming to our planet wouldn't work. Or at least would be very, very difficult. And let's not forget, the universe is huge. The Milky Way galaxy alone is estimated to have 2 billion stars. Just stars. That's not let alone planets. And that's just in our galaxy. And we theorize there's about 100 billion galaxies in the universe right now. And we theorize that more are popping up every single day. But I find this guy is just using the argument of negatives. He's just saying, well, we haven't found anything yet, so therefore the science points more toward God, because, well, we haven't made contact, so therefore it's less likely. It's a miracle that we're here, therefore it was God. That's a way oversimplification, especially a way oversimplification of the science.
What happened? As our knowledge of the universe increased, it became clear that there were, in fact, far more factors necessary for life, let alone intelligent life, than Sagan supposed. His 2 parameters grew to 10, then 20, and then 50, which meant that the number of potentially life-supporting planets decreased accordingly.
Yes, but the more factors we're involving, the more minute they are. The factors that I showed and the factors that Carl Sagan theorized are the major factors that you need. Well, there are other factors that do make a difference. What we need to actually have is a planet that can support the life. The life has to find a way on its own, such as humans. We went through many factors that technically should have killed us off. Ice ages that should have killed us off, but here we are today. An ice age on another planet, we would just assume, well, then it can't support life. We survived. Other species survived. That's why I'm sticking with the main factors that I've put forward, which have scientifically always been the main factors as to what goes into making a planet. These, 10, 20, 50, these are sub-factors, if I can say that, if I can put it that way. They're not as significant, but they will help improve the chances of life. But the difference is that this guy is trying to present them as if without these factors, there cannot be life. That is absolutely not true. Right now, we're going all by statistics and probabilities. But instead, he's using the probabilities as an absolute. He's saying, because the probabilities say this, well, that means there is no life form, or there is very minute, and we haven't found it. Therefore, the science points toward God. It does not, in any regard, point in that way, because in order for the science to point that way, it has to actually show that it may have been made by creation, and we haven't proven that. Fuck, we've investigated planet-side only... Pretty much the only planets we have investigated are the planets in our solar system. We haven't branched out to any other solar system, but then at least this guy is taking the arrogant approach that because we haven't found anything, that means nothing's out there.
The number dropped to a few thousand planets and kept on plummeting.
A few thousand planets, I'm sorry, let me reiterate that. 200 billion stars in our solar system, 100 billion galaxies in the universe. A few thousand planets? Excuse me? The problem is here too, is this guy is claiming to know more than the science is showing. Because one thing religious people like to talk about these days is the arrogance of science. How science thinks it knows everything. Actually, that's where they're wrong. Because I hear scientists all the time saying, we don't know, we don't know, we theorize this, we think that. But on the other side, from the religious side, it's always, it's this, it's that, we know this. And this is exactly the type of narrative that this guy is pushing inside this video. He's saying, you don't know, therefore I am right. I saw this too, used against Bill Nye in 2013 when he debated Ken Ham at the creation. Kevin Ham. I always want to call him Ken Ham, but Kevin Ham at the Creationist Museum. That was exactly what Kevin Ham was saying throughout the whole debate, is that you don't know, therefore I am right. Therefore it shows that my position is right. No, it doesn't. It just shows that we don't know. From the rationalist side, the empirical side, is that we have a big problem with dealing in absolutes when we don't know for sure. We're not going to sit there and say we know for a fact that alien life form is out there. But the probability of how big our universe is, how many stars, how many planets, how little we know about different types of life forms. We're still even learning different types of life forms here on Earth. Well, you're taking that and then dealing it in absolutes that science doesn't know. Science hasn't figured it out yet. That's the great thing about science. It's always learning. It's always evolving. That's the best thing about science. And I don't know simply says we haven't figured out the answer yet. And if science was to then come out and not know the answer and say, here it is, then they are getting just as arrogant as the church and every other religion was back in the day. And in some regards, science is doing that. Because while I do see some scientists pushing out against certain narratives that are being pushed these days, the fact that people think that they can point to bullshit pseudoscience as being real just shows that science is, in some regards, letting us down in this category. But in my opinion, just my stupid opinion, anybody who doesn't know the full story, who will deal in absolutes, is a fool. when I'm coming here and I'm defending the fact that there's a possibility that other life forms are out there, I don't know that for a fact. For all I know, Prager and this guy is right. There is a God. We are the only life forms for all I know. But the science doesn't point us in that direction, and also the probability factor doesn't point us in this direction. He's trying to manipulate the probability factor through, as I've already said, using what is a probability. He's using it to try and dictate absolution.
Even SETI proponents acknowledge the problem. Peter Schenkel wrote in a 2006 piece for Skeptical Inquirer, a magazine that strongly affirms atheism, "In light of new findings and insights, we should quietly admit that the early estimates may no longer be tenable." Today, there are more than 200 known parameters necessary for a planet to support life, every single one of which must be perfectly met or the whole thing falls apart.
So he says that the early estimates can no longer be tenable. Okay, once again, not proving that God made the universe. Because even if we take the idea that the Earth is the only planet that can support life, then once again, we're dealing with probabilities. Once again, how many stars, how many planets, how many galaxies? Even if the chances are very small that life could be supported through the factors necessary, it's going to change once you keep putting planets out there, putting solar systems out there, putting galaxies out there. It's kind of a crapshoot, you know? Think of it almost, if you want, like the way that life works. What do you put, there are about 6 million sperm that will fight it out to try and get to the egg, and only one will get there. So 6 million sperm failed and one succeeded. And this is sort of the same way you could look at the Earth, is that by probability, when you have so many stars, so many planets, so many different distances, so many different stars, so many different temperatures, different ozones and climates, one planet, at least one, had to work out, and that would be Earth. But that does not prove anything about God creating the universe, or the planet Earth, or that we're made in his image. 200 factors? No, 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 no. It does not take 200 factors. Because personally, I've taken a look through, and I can't find these 200 factors that you're talking about. I've seen other scientists and scientific magazines talk about the factors necessary, which always seem to be the same, but I can't find these 200 factors. But one thing that has also been theorized is that octopuses are not in fact from Earth, that they're so different from any other animal that they're not in fact from Earth. Whether that's true or not, I don't have no fucking idea, but I thought that was a little bit interesting.
For example, without a massive gravity-rich planet like Jupiter nearby to draw away asteroids, Earth would be more like an interstellar dartboard than the verdant orb that it is.
Hey, no arguments here, man. That is absolutely necessary, that the gravitational pull of Jupiter does attract a lot of asteroids and shit and comets. There's no argument from me here. But once again, even with a lot of asteroids striking, that doesn't mean life can't be supported. Life can be supported underground. We don't even know how life can be supported how deep into the ground it can be supported by different types of life forms.
Simply put, the odds against life in the universe are astonishing. Yet, here we are, not only existing, but talking about existing. What can account for it?
So the odds are astronomical, yet here we are existing and talking about existing, therefore there is a God. Great argument, buddy.
Can every one of those many parameters have been perfectly met by accident?
Absolutely. When you put out 200 billion stars in one galaxy alone, and then you put out another 100 billion galaxies, absolutely those factors can be met by accident.
At what point is it fair to admit that it is science itself that suggests that we cannot be the result of random forces?
At what point is it fair to admit that it is science itself that suggests that we cannot be the result of random forces? Is it really that hard to believe in a universe such as ours that we could be by random chance? Is it really that fucking hard to believe when we know this much? Back in the day, I actually could understand if it was that hard to believe. Because when they thought they were the center of the universe, then it actually may have supported the idea that there was a creator. But that wasn't the case. So is it fair that it cannot be made by random forces? No, because that has not been proven in this video. It has not been proven by the evidence that was presented by our fellow here. Because once again, most of his argument adds up to the fact we haven't made contact and the fact that we haven't, through, telescopes, seen any contact means that there cannot be a life form. Any sort of a life form out there. Even if we haven't made contact with intelligent life form. This to me is a very soft argument because you're letting a lot of things go. You're letting go, again, just how big our universe truly is. And a good example of this is if we take a look at this image from the Hubble telescope. This image was taken when the Hubble telescope was pointed in one direction for 100 hours, and they just let it record. Every single thing you're seeing out there, those are a multitude of galaxies, just like our Milky Way. Think about how big the Earth is. That is a dust mite in comparison to the galaxy. If I can make a comparison, dust mites are to the Earth what humans are to the universe. And that might even be a wrong comparison because a dust mite might still be bigger in comparison to the Earth than humans are in comparison to the rest of the universe. Now, I'm just going off the numbers that we have in the Milky Way galaxy. But every single one of those beautiful, colorful galaxies hold billions of other stars, with billions if not trillions of other planets, with their own individual unique stars, individual unique planets, in various ways. And to say that all those, because we haven't made contact with them, or we haven't seen evidence from them, of life forms, well, again, a lot of times the lack of evidence can point that it's not there. The difference is we're trying to look into the whole universe, and somewhere in this huge, huge, huge pile of hay, we're trying to pick out a needle. It's going to take a long time, and it's going to take better technology than what we have available. So, is it fair to say that science cannot suggest that we are the result of random forces? No. He says, what point can we admit that? You're going to have to show a lot more evidence than that, buddy. A lot more evidence.
Doesn't assuming that an intelligence created these perfect conditions in fact require far less faith than believing that a life-sustaining Earth just happened to beat the inconceivable odds?
Not to me. To me, it doesn't seem that incredible that Earth beat the odds, because once again, I feel that some planet somewhere had to beat the odds. And I don't feel like we are the only planet that beat the odds. We had a good factor that led us to develop intelligent life. And I believe that there is other intelligent life out there, just based on how big the universe is. But this is the similar arrogance of religion, as he's saying. Like, of course, he's making a religious argument when he says it doesn't make more sense, or it takes less faith to believe that was made by a creator. Well, no, because then you got to prove, where is evidence of this creator? It's not a small argument to make to say that there is an all-powerful, almighty creator out there that controls everything, is in charge of everything, that can't be usurped. This is not a small suggestion. This is a suggestion based on how the universe is formed. You're getting into science's territory there. So prove to me the evidence of a creator, and your evidence has to be better than the lack of evidence from science. Because science has once again said many times it doesn't know, or it doesn't know yet. But you're trying to say that because science doesn't know now, that means that science will never know, science cannot know, and because of that, it's validating your argument. Even if you could convince me of a reason to to act as if God exists. If you could say that without God, there's just this morality problem, you need to believe in God in order to have the earth and people and civilization moving forward morally. Even if you could convince me of that, the lack of evidence for an actual supreme being means that I wouldn't believe in a supreme being. I would believe in the doctrine, per se, and believe that those rules and morals should be enforced. That doesn't mean that I believe in an almighty creator. So far, at least in this video, what I have seen from this guy is a lot of science doesn't know yet, science hasn't proven it yet, and therefore it's validating my argument of there's a God and the universe was made by creation. But you haven't presented any argument for your side, for actually a religious point of view and saying here's the evidence of a God and he created the universe. No evidence has been presented. But let's move on. Let him finish. Alright, well, let's move on anyway and let him finish up his argument.
But wait, there's more.
Oh, is
The
there?
fine-tuning necessary for life to exist on a planet is nothing compared with the fine-tuning required for the universe to exist at all. For example, astrophysicists now know that the values of the 4 fundamental forces, gravity, the electromagnetic force, and the strong and weak nuclear forces, were determined less than 1/1,000,000th of a second after the Big Bang. Alter any one of these 4 values ever so slightly, and the universe as we know it could not exist.
Because that's the fabric of the universe. That's the underpinning of the universe. This is what makes it what it is. Okay, let me see if I can explain it to this guy. Everything is made up of something. You know, humans are made up of carbon, hydrogen, atoms. Everything is made up of atoms. Everything has a fundamental core base. A chemical base, if you will. This would be what you can consider the universe's chemical base. Once again, you've proven what something is, but you haven't proven that it's related back to a creator. And he says, how is this decided? Probably because that's what allowed the universe to be what it is today. I don't have the answer for you with that one, but once again, by pointing to this and saying, what is this, is not a valid argument for a deity.
For instance, if the ratio between the strong nuclear force and the electromagnetic force had been off by the tiniest fraction of the tiniest inconceivable fraction, then no stars could have formed at all.
Yes, that's right. That's absolutely right. There couldn't be stars, there couldn't be existence without them. But there is. See, one thing I've said before, I don't know if I said it on the podcast, but I say in my personal life, it has to do, not even with this, but it has to do with why are we here? People say, why are we here? What is the meaning to our existence? I'll admit, it is an oversimplification of everything, but for the layman, I find it's a good example. People say, why are we here? My answer to this is because if there's not something, there's nothing. And what I mean by this is that we're not here for some grand creative purpose. We weren't here because God put us each here as an individual and decided that we each have an individual purpose in this world. If this calculation, this chemical composition that the guy is talking about the fabric of the universe, if that was off, we wouldn't be here talking about it. But it wasn't off. It was perfect. Holy shit, it just turns out. Because this was what was necessary. This was the mixture, the combination that was required in order to create our universe from this Big Bang. Now, well, I'll be the first one to say, sure, it sounds crazy thinking about that one point our whole universe was smaller than the head of a pin. And then exploded outward to create this whole giant, massive universe that we know. Of course, it sounds crazy. The difference is, unlike telling somebody that there is a God and he created the earth, the only evidence we have for that is the Bible, where science at least has testing, and there's things that we can tell about the universe. For instance, that the universe is always expanding and there are echoes from the Big Bang. I'm going to admit, would I rather people look other places than come to me to try and get this information, but just as an example. But I don't hear any echoes of a creator. I don't see any evidence of a creator involved in this. And if you don't believe it's by random chance that we could be here, then why the fuck are so many planets unlivable? Because despite the fact I talk about there's still a lot of livable planets, there's still a shit ton more that are unlivable. So it seems to me that this is by combination. This is by random chance. Life finds a way. I feel that if it was made by a creator, why not make every single planet able to support life? Why would you put all these extra planets completely inhabitable? To me, that almost supports more about the random chance theory than it does made by committee, made by creation theory. But let's move on. Just remember, he's saying that without that the proper combination, no stars could form at all. The universe could not exist. So, moving on.
Multiply that single parameter by all the other necessary conditions, and the odds against the universe existing are so heart-stoppingly astronomical that the notion that it all just happened defies common sense.
Well, I don't personally believe, I don't have the evidence to support it, but I don't believe that it just happened. I think there's some factors, there's some history there that we don't know what it was about. But hey, maybe scientists are wrong in this perspective and the universe has always just been here. That's it. Even though we theorize about how old the universe is. Maybe the universe has just always just been here. I mean, that's not my response to that. I'm just adding that in as a possibility. But your argument of, think about how crazy that is, doesn't have enough empirical evidence to it to say that it was made by a creator. Even if, let's say, in this video, he's showing some flaws inside of the Big Bang theory, he still has not proven about creation. And the problem with creation is that we were made in God's image, and with that, you have a whole fucking evolutionary theory that you got to break apart because we have a lot of evidence in there. Even though people say, well, it's a flawed theory, it's like, you got a lot of chains to break inside that theory before you can actually say it's a flawed theory. So this also doesn't support his argument.
It would be like tossing a coin and having it come up heads 10 quintillion times in a row. I don't think so.
Yeah, and guess what? That is actually a completely plausible scenario if you do it all the time. Now, if you're just going to say, I'm going to do this once and it's going to come up heads, then absolutely, you're not going to do that. It's not going to be the odds. You're not going to get it on heads 1 quintillionth of a time, whatever his number was. So if his argument was that we had one planet in the whole universe and this was it, then I absolutely would agree with him. But the fact that we have so many so many galaxies, so many planets, then it becomes a real possible scenario. Not a plausible one, but a possible scenario. Because the thing about chance is, it's like when people say the lottery and they say, don't ever play, 0, 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever, because it's never going to come up. Well, the chances of that number coming up are exactly the same as any other number that are picked. And it's the same sort of scenario in this. While there may be, that might be the number that you have to come up with, when you produce, if you were to try that a quintillion times, but then do that times that number by 10, you try that, then odds start turning in your favor, which is the same sort of thing you could look at Earth. As more planets and solar system and universes getting put out that aren't matching up, eventually one planet is going to be perfect, and that turns out to be Earth. At least one planet has got to be perfect, because it will beat the odds. Because even if that number, whatever it was, 1 quintillionth, there's still a shit ton more planets in the universe than that. So suddenly, even though this is a huge number, the odds actually aren't as incredible as they sound. Moving on.
Fred Hoyle, the astronomer who coined the term Big Bang, said that his atheism was greatly shaken by these developments. One of the world's most renowned theoretical physicists, Paul Davies, has said that the appearance of design is overwhelming. Even the late Christopher Hitchens, one of atheism's most aggressive proponents, conceded that without question the fine-tuning argument was the most powerful argument of the other side.
Hey, I mean, don't get me wrong. On our side, we got a lot of odds to put up with, and we have a lot we don't know of. It's also a lot harder when there's people saying there, well, we know exactly what it is, and this is it. So, don't get me wrong. I'm sure there were some shaken feelings about that. I mean, I've had a couple times my atheism a little shaken just by arguments made with the other side just off the bat because they sound really good. But the thing is even though he says this, that doesn't mean that any of these people have actually pertained to this. They said their atheism was shaken. Christopher Hitchens said it was with difficult argument. Once again, does not prove creation. Because maybe I'm crazy on this, but if you're going to, and maybe I'm alone, but if you're going to make an argument like that about the foundation of the earth, you've got to show empirical evidence that it's that way. Otherwise, your theory doesn't stand up. Science is a leash showing empirical evidence. You are not. Essentially, they're taking a theory and saying, well, your theory hasn't proved this, which proves my theory. My theory of creationism is proved because science can't explain it yet.
Oxford University professor of mathematics, Dr. John Lennox, has said, the more we get to know about our universe, the more the hypothesis that there is a creator gains in credibility as the best explanation of why we are here. The greatest miracle of all time is the universe. It is the miracle of all miracles, one that inescapably points to something or someone beyond itself.
This whole miracle thing, saying it's a miracle, you know what a miracle is? It's beating the odds. Miracle and luck are numbers. That's all they are. They're not some underlying supernatural force. Even though we say things like good luck to each other. I say that too to people, good luck. I hope you do well. What we're saying is we're hoping they do well. We hope they beat the odds. Because in a miracle, what ends up happening is the chances of something happening are so small, but it ended up happening anyway. So this is what a miracle is. It's all about numbers. So once again, when people say that it's a miracle, it is a miracle among miracles. Don't get me wrong, I'll agree with you. But I'm agreeing not that it was a miracle as by some super force. I think it's a miracle because it was astronomical odds that we had to beat. We had astronomical odds to beat. But we did beat them. And we may not be alone. We can't prove it yet. But just because we can't prove it yet doesn't mean that it's not true. Just means we don't know. But again, going back to luck and miracle. When you say good luck to somebody, you just want them to do well. You're not wishing some super force on them. And when someone gets lucky, such as wins the lottery, it's because they've beaten those odds, because there were so many people playing the lottery, but they got chosen out of all of them. And that's the same thing with a miracle. If you think once again, if 1 billion people plays the lottery and only one person wins the lottery, well, technically that's a miracle by chance. The type of, what the chance was of actually winning that for yourself. So that's my other problem with when you say it's a miracle is when he says it's a miracle, he's saying it's some supernatural force, it's some external entity that is assisting, that created us. When in fact, it is just beating the odds. Now, don't get me wrong. A lot of what you point towards does show that it could be difficult sometimes to go against the argument of a deity creating the universe. Because you say, well, shit, there doesn't seem to be any planets that support intelligent life or even life that we can find. It looks like we may be the only one. But again, I find this is human arrogance because we're saying we don't know, therefore we are sure. At least that's what it seems to me.
I'm Eric Metaxas for Prager University.
So just to summarize, my problems with this video have to do with the fact that Prager University presented their information in a very biased direction, I would say. I don't want to say it's manipulating the evidence, but, well, essentially what they were doing the entire time is just taking the evidence, the lack thereof of intelligent life that have been found, using that to determine that there seems to be no form of life outside of Earth. And then on top of that, well, yes, it is without a doubt a difficult argument sometimes when we're looking at all the factors. I find when you take a much larger look at what the universe is supposed to be, like how it's made up, then these factors suddenly are minimized. But because of this, because there are these factors that must be achieved by a planet in order to support life, they're trying to present this and say that that is a determining factor for no life. So it seems to me in this argument, instead of it being an argument for God, it's really an argument about whether there's life on other planets. It hasn't really gone to enforce the argument that there is a deity and that we're all made by creation. But they're trying to insinuate, or at least they're trying to correlate a deity and the theory of creationism into the lack of evidence that science has for life on other planets. But when we look at what is available to us for information about other planets, it's very limited. All we really can do is theorize based on what we've seen of the solar system, of the stars and its planets, whether it can support life. But this is a very low resolution way to look at these planets. While we're going on probabilities right now, it most likely cannot support life. But we're also going on what we know life to be. It's very possible that in a different solar system, there is a different form of life that is not sustainable on Earth. Again, I'm just going on theories too, but I find mine, at the very least, have more substance to them. Because mine are very theoretically possible situations. It doesn't mean that they're true. But this guy's taking the science and he's trying to correlate it to a completely other theory, in my opinion. So I thought this was not the best work done. Maybe I'm wrong, and if people don't agree with my take on it, then make a comment below and let's see.